by Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, VVSM, AVSM, YSM, SM, and VSM. So it's also a PhD. It's my honor to introduce Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan. He was the chairman of the Ceasefire Monitoring Group in August 2018. He was the Director General of Assam Rifles, India's oldest and largest paramilitary force. He has held several key appointments during his long career in the army. He has served at the apex level in the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Home Insurgency, Counter-Terrorism, Border Guarding, and Human Resource Management. He also has vast experience in military diplomacy since he was the defense attaché in the Indian Embassy in Nepal for 3.5 years, that's between 2004 and 7. Apart from this one, the type of insights that he brings in are phenomenally great. And it's indeed our pleasure to have Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan. Sir, over to you. You can speak till 4:45, and at 4:40, we will have Ram Madhavji joining, and he will begin at 4:45. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Commodore Vasan, for the initial keynote address. I have been speaking on the Russian-Ukraine war over the last 2 weeks. That's ever since it began. And a couple of things that I've noticed and I feel that it's essential for us to understand is firstly, a little bit of a history. We cannot understand the present. We cannot deal with the future unless we understand the past. Well, Russia began this invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. That's about roughly 16 days ago. It was a major escalation of the ongoing crisis. It wasn't something that was new. It was an ongoing crisis on the Russian-Ukrainian war that began actually in 2014. And since World War II, this is the largest military action that has taken place in Europe. To understand why Russia has done this, let's go to the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity in February 2014. You're all aware that Russia annexed Crimea and the Russian-backed separatists also seized a part of southeast Ukraine in Donbass. In 2021, Russians began a large-scale military build-up along its border with Ukraine. They also had a major exercise with Belarus and therefore built a large force north of Ukraine, that is in the area of Belarus. And this led to an international crisis. And during this time, President Putin espoused Russia's views. He kept on, in many ways, announcing to the world that he would not accept this movement of Ukraine towards NATO. He didn't understand, and he didn't want people who didn't want NATO to come in. And he also said that if NATO gets nuclear weapons if NATO gets nuclear weapons into Ukraine, then the crisis would be similar to what happened in Cuba in 1962, when the US threatened a nuclear war over the placing of nuclear missiles in Cuba. He also accused, and here is a lot of doublespeak, Ukraine of committing genocide against its Russian-speaking population. You're aware that the area of Donbass, in the area of Donetsk, in the area of Luhansk, there are a lot of Russian-speaking people. Almost 40% of the population of these three districts actually have Russians. The background is that when Ukraine was a part of the USSR, there were a large number of Russian workers that were settled in Ukraine, but now have become a largest minority. And if you count both eastern and western Ukraine, east and western divided between the Dnieper River, you would actually come to know that about 20% of, or 20 to 30% of the population in eastern Ukraine, that is the population that's the area closer to Russia, are Russian speaking or supporters of Russia. And maximum number of Ukraine, in the white Ukrainians, as they say, are west of the Dnieper River. So on the next day, that is 24th, the Russian Federation Council unanimously echoed Putin's authorization of military force, and the Russians entered both territories. Putin announced that a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine was going to start. And minutes later, the missiles and airstrikes hit places across the Ukraine, including the capital of Kyiv. Now, what happens? What happens on the other side? Within minutes of Putin's announcements, explosions were reported in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, in Odessa, and the Donbas region. An alleged leaked report of the Russian spy agency, FSB, claims that the agency was not warned about Putin's plan to invade Ukraine. So is it a one-off situation, or is Ukraine playing a game here, or something? These are issues that we must actually analyze as military analysts go. There were multi-pronged assaults that were launched from Russia, Belarus, and the two occupied territories of Ukraine, that is Crimea and Donbass. And four specific war theaters, four specific lines of intrusion or incursion or invasion happened. As you'll probably be knowing, I commanded the Strike Corps. I commanded India's largest and oldest Strike Corps, Strike 1. And during my time as the GOC of Strike Corps, of the Strike Corps, we had held a large exercise with the Russians, wherein a major general of their motorized brigade had come in at the Thar Desert. And I had the occasion to sit down and talk to him about a lot of issues. And this was in 2016, so not very far back. And what I realized was that the Russians are very clear about how they plan to take out operations like that. Of course, our exercise was to do with counterterrorism. But even during the time that we were talking about counterterrorism, the Russian general, I will not take his name, always spoke of using artillery support. And the other thing that you should know, and it's important again for you to understand before you start judging how Russians carry out their operations, is the Russian use of artillery and masked artillery. And the second thing is that their motorized brigades are almost as large as a division, are commanded by a major general, and always carry nuclear weapons with them. So it's necessary for us to keep in mind this particular issue. Now, how far will Russia go? It's already clear that Vladimir Putin has said that he seeks control of Ukraine. He wants to overthrow the government of President Zelensky, who has been democratically elected. But after the revolution that took place in 2014, where a pro-Russian leader and president of Ukraine was removed. And at that time, there are whispers, and now it's well known, that the CIA and the US had helped in the removal of the pro-Russian president of Ukraine. So Russia's stated goal is that Ukraine will be freed from oppression and cleansed of the Nazis, the neo-Nazis. And under this false narrative that Ukraine is being run by fascists since 2014, Mr. Putin has spoken about bringing to court those who committed bloody war crimes against the civilians. He has denied aiming to occupy Ukraine, and he's rejected a UK's accusation before the war that he was plotting to install a pro-Kremlin puppet. But then he had also said that there would be no invasion. So you can't take Ukraine, or you can't take Putin at face value. Is there an immediate threat to Russia's Baltic neighbors? There's a lot of talk about the Third World War. There's a lot of talk about NATO entering this war. But NATO can only enter this war, and you must remember that, if Russia was to invade a NATO country. So that, if you keep in mind, and Putin has said this again and again, that there is no immediate threat or no threat at all to the Baltic republics, who are now a part of NATO. But at any rate, even then, NATO has bolstered their defenses just in case. Now, in 2015, uh, President Putin wrote a long piece describing the Russians and Ukrainians as one nation. And he described the collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991 as the disintegration of historical Russia. Somebody who's worked out of Belarus through a long-time authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko. But in Ukraine, that is quite another matter. So, if there is no problem to the Baltic republics, I don't see World War III happening. I don't see the Baltic republics under attack by Putin. The third issue that I wanted to tell you, and what I feel is important for us as strategic analysts to understand, is the narratives that are now going around this particular war. There is one narrative, that's the Western narrative, the narrative that we spread by the Western countries. Countries like the US, NATO countries, and Western Europe. They have one narrative that says that Russia is an evil power, that Russia and Putin must be removed, and that Russians are criminals and will face war crimes. That is one narrative. That narrative says that Russia is losing the war. That narrative says that Russians are committing mass-scale abuse of power, of human rights. That narrative also says that Zelensky is winning and that the Ukrainians are putting on a huge, huge fight. There is now the second narrative. That is the narrative of Russia. The Russian narrative is not being heard at all in the world, because the NATO powers have absolutely blanked out Russia today and the balance of anything, any mass media from Russia outside. Twitter, Facebook, all these mass media applications have stopped functioning in Russia. So we don't know what that narrative is at all. But at the same time, you have to understand that the Russian and the truth, what are the Russian narratives and what is the truth? The power of actors in contemporary conflict is no longer defined just by military equipment, but also by the support of the people at home and the people in the occupied part of Ukraine. Russia has mastered this ability to conduct an information war. But within the area of Ukraine, probably might find the carrying out of this information war very difficult. Throughout this invasion, there is another narrative that comes out. The messages, the videos, the photographs, and the audio recordings of ordinary people using their mobile phones to photograph what is happening inside Ukraine and to beam it across the world. But once again, like that invariable elephant and the blind men of Hindustan, where each one of the people is actually touching only one part of the elephant, we are unable to understand the larger strategic perspective of what actually is happening in this war. Now, that's important for us to understand, because otherwise we cannot be strategic thinkers. We cannot be strategic. We cannot tell you what's going to happen when we simply don't know what's happening inside. And who actually knows what's happening inside? Do the Ukrainians in Kyiv know? Do the Americans know? With their mass media ability? Do the Russians know? But are unable to tell us. So these are issues that when we talk about discussing an ongoing war, these are the casualties of war. The truth is the casualty of war. We get taken in by a particular narrative. We get taken in by the fact that the Russians might be losing. We get taken in by the fact that the Russians haven't planned this particular attack well. We get taken in by the fact that maybe there's going to be a mass-scale insurgency tomorrow in Ukraine. But from my interaction with the Russian army, which has been considerable and at the apex level, all I can say is that I was extremely impressed by the Russian ability to wage war. I was impressed by the professionalism of Russian soldiers. I was impressed by the professionalism of their small team leaders. So we have to be very, very clear when we discuss this as to what part we are actually planning to speak about. And I would request my colleagues who speak after me to keep this particular thing in mind, that when you speak about this war, speak in totality about what's happening and not as the blind men of Hindustan, who simply have no clue what and which part of the narrative we are picking up what. Thank you. I wish this session all success, and we look forward to now Mr. Ram Madhav's lecture and the rest of the session going on. Thank you so much.